Every expert they sent ended up bleeding. Every trainer walked off the property with torn equipment and shattered confidence. Titan, 200 pounds of muscle, scar tissue, and barely contained fury, had broken 6 specialists in 4 months. And Lucian Vescari, the most feared man on the eastern seaboard, was standing in his own driveway watching a plus-sized woman in grass-stained sneakers sit cross-legged on his gravel like she owned the place, pulling homemade treats from a crumpled paper bag, and talking to his monster of a dog like he was a nervous rescue puppy at a church adoption fair. The dog, his dog, the one that had put a canine handler in the hospital last Tuesday, rolled onto his back, tail wagging. Lucian hadn't felt confused in 11 years. He felt it now. If this story already has your heart pounding, hit that like button right now. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from, and let's see how far this one travels. Stay with me until the very end. You won't regret it. The call came at 6:14 in the morning, which meant Marcus had been up since at least 4, which meant something had already gone wrong before the sun finished rising. Lucian Viscari answered on the second ring. He always answered on the second ring. The first ring was for people who panicked, and the third ring was for people who didn't take things seriously. 2 was the number of a man who knew exactly what was coming and had already decided how he felt about it. Hargrove walked, Marcus said. No greeting. Marcus Dello had been Lucien's head of security for 9 years and hadn't said good morning once in all of them. Lucien stood at the tall window of his study, bare feet on cold hardwood, watching the gray pre-dawn sky over the property's east tree line. Walked how? Packed his bag, left the gate code on the kitchen counter, didn't take the signing bonus. That last part was significant. Devin Hargrove had accepted $40,000 as a retention deposit 3 weeks ago. Certified master trainer, 15 years with federal K-9 units, 2 decades working with European working dog programs. He'd walked away from $40,000 rather than spend another day on the Vescari property. What happened? Marcus paused. Titan got into the training pen with him during the morning rotation. Hargrove had the shock collar controller, used it twice. Another pause. Titan took both hits and kept moving. Lucien closed his eyes for 2 seconds. That was his version of a long exhale. Hargrove's hand? 3 fingers. The orthopedic guy says he'll have most of the function back in 4 to 6 months. Lucien set his coffee cup down on the windowsill without drinking from it. The coffee was already cold anyway. He'd poured it an hour ago during a call with the accountant and hadn't touched it since because the accountant had explained in careful and frightened language that their laundry operation through the Meridian Property Group was producing a paper trail that a moderately motivated IRS auditor could follow without breaking a sweat. That conversation had stolen his appetite for coffee. The Hargrove situation was stealing something else. He hadn't quite identified it yet. Pull the agency list, he said. Find whoever's next. Lucy Yen. Marcus only used his first name when he was about to say something the boss wasn't going to like. We're through the list. There's no one left in the tri-state area who'll take the job. Word got out after the second incident. The liability insurers won't even return calls. Lucien turned from the window. The study was dark except for the desk lamp, which threw a cone of yellow light over a surface covered in property documents, legal correspondence, and a photograph of his father that he kept face down because he found it easier to think with it that way. He looked at the photograph's back. White cardstock. His father's handwriting on it in blue pen, a date from 19 years ago. Then find someone who hasn't heard, he said, and ended the call. What nobody outside the Viscari family understood, and what Lucien himself would never have articulated aloud, was that Titan wasn't just a security asset. The cane Corso had been a gift from his uncle Renato 3 years ago, presented at a dinner that had also functioned as a peace summit between 2 factions that had spent 18 months trying to dismantle each other. Renato had placed the puppy, 8 weeks old, already barrel-chested, already watching the room with the particular stillness that would later become terrifying, into Lucien's arms across a table covered in white linen and untouched wine. He comes from a line that doesn't forget, Renato had said. Same as us. Renato was dead now. Cardiac arrest 14 months ago, though cardiac arrest covered a lot of territory depending on what your definition of natural causes was. Titan was what was left. The dog had always been difficult. As a puppy, difficult meant unpredictable. Affectionate one moment, teeth the next, no readable transition between the two states. As he'd grown into his full mass, difficult had become something else entirely. He'd been through 4 trainers in his first year, another 2 the year after. He followed Lucien's commands with total precision. He followed Marcus's commands with tolerable reliability. He followed no one else's commands at all. And he developed a specific hostility towards strangers on the property that had escalated in the 8 months since Renato's death, until it crossed from working dog aggression into something that made even Lucien's most stone-faced lieutenants take long routes around the kennels. The problem was that the Viscari operation required visitors, frequent judges and city councilmen and 3 state senators, and a rotating cast of business contacts and legal representatives and men who arrived in cars with dark windows and left checks that would never pass through a bank. These visitors could not be told that the property's primary security animal was borderline feral. They had to be managed around it, and Titan was increasingly difficult to manage around. "He's grieving," Lucien's cousin Pia had said once, watching Titan pace the length of his kennel run from the window of the main house. "Dogs grieve, especially this kind." "He's a working animal," Lucien had said. "So are you," Pia had said. "And look at you." He hadn't spoken to Pia for 2 weeks after that, which was itself a kind of answer. By the time Marcus produced a new name, it was late on a Wednesday, and Lucien was in the middle of a meeting that had been running for 3 hours and had another 2 to go. Marcus slipped a printed sheet onto the corner of the conference table, waited with a glass paperweight so it didn't slide, and withdrew without interrupting the discussion about port logistics that was currently consuming 6 men in expensive suits. Lucien glanced at the sheet during a pause in the conversation. The page was thin on details. An agency referral, not one of the elite K9 firms, but a mid-tier service that handled routine behavioral cases, obedience work, basic companion animal management. Below the agency header, a single name, Marlo Bennett. Certified animal behaviorist, specialization in high anxiety and trauma-affected working breeds. 7 years experience. 1 client note in the file, handwritten and barely legible. Handles what other trainers won't touch. Unorthodox methods, good with difficult cases. At the bottom of the sheet, Marcus had written in ballpoint, "She doesn't know the client profile. Booked through the agency under a holding company name, 1-week consult. She thinks it's a private security firm's K9 behavioral assessment." Lucien folded the sheet once and put it in his jacket pocket and returned his attention to the port logistics discussion, which had moved on to warehouse lease negotiations and was no less tedious for it. He didn't think about Marlo Bennett again until the following Monday morning, when Marcus appeared in the doorway of the study at 7:58 and said simply, "She's here." The first thing Lucien noticed was that she was late, not egregiously. 4 minutes, which the gate log confirmed had been due to a confusion over the service entrance versus the main drive. But he noticed it because he noticed everything, and because the last 6 specialists had arrived precisely on time with the particular brand of punctuality that said, "I know what you are, and I am being very careful." This woman had apparently gotten lost in his driveway and hadn't seemed especially apologetic about it. He watched from the study window as her car, a 10-year-old Subaru with a cracked rear bumper and what appeared to be 3 different parking permits on the windshield, pulled to a stop on the gravel turnaround. She got out carrying a canvas tote bag, not a professional equipment case. She was looking at the main house with an expression that wasn't intimidated and wasn't impressed. It was the expression of someone trying to figure out if she'd parked in the right spot. Marcus was already moving toward her from the side gate. Lucien watched him say something, watched her nod, watched her reach back into the car for a second bag. Cloth, faded blue, stuffed with something that crinkled when she squeezed it. Then she looked up at the east wall of the property, where the kennel block was visible over the roofline, and she smiled. Not a performance smile, something private and involuntary, like a person who'd spotted something they recognized. Lucien had spent 20 years reading people's faces for the thing they were trying not to show. He hadn't expected to see genuine pleasure. He picked up his coffee and went downstairs. He didn't introduce himself immediately. This was habit rather than strategy. He'd found over the years that the moment before a person realized who they were talking to was often more revealing than anything they said afterward. He came around the corner of the east corridor as Marcus was leading her toward the kennels, falling into step at a distance that suggested staff rather than principal. She was talking, not nervously. She wasn't doing the rapid fill-the-silence thing that anxious people defaulted to. She was asking Marcus questions and listening to the answers with what appeared to be actual attention. What was Titan's daily feeding schedule? How much off-leash time was he getting? Had there been any changes to his environment in the last year? New staff, new animals, structural changes to the kennels. Marcus answered in the clipped monosyllables he used with everyone. She didn't seem to notice or mind. The file said he's been escalating for about 8 months, she said. Anything happen around that time? Illness, injury, loss of a regular handler or companion animal? Marcus's pace slowed almost imperceptibly. Lucien, close enough to hear but not close enough to have been introduced, watched Marcus decide whether to answer honestly. There was a death in the family, Marcus said finally. Someone the dog spent significant time with. Ah. She nodded once, like something had just confirmed itself. Yeah, that'll do it. They'd reached the kennel gate. Through the chain link, Titan was visible at the far end of the run, already standing, already tracking her, the big head low and still in that particular way that wasn't calm at all. The 3 previous specialists had all paused here. 2 of them had asked for protective gear. One had requested that they discuss the safety protocols before proceeding further. Marlo Bennett set her tote bag down on the concrete, crouched until she was sitting cross-legged on the ground in front of the gate, and opened the cloth bag. It crinkled. She pulled out something that looked like a homemade biscuit. Can I have the gate? She asked Marcus without looking up. Marcus looked at Lucien. Lucien, from his position 8 feet behind them, looked at the dog. Titan had gone completely still. Not the stillness of aggression, the stillness of something uncertain. He nodded once. Marcus opened the gate. What? She didn't enter. That was the first thing that registered as different. Every trainer before her had gone in, asserting presence, establishing themselves, doing the various things that certified working dog handlers did to establish authority over a difficult animal. She stayed outside the gate, on the concrete, cross-legged, and put a biscuit on the ground about 6 inches in front of her knees. Titan didn't move for 90 seconds. Lucien counted. Then the dog walked forward. Slowly, with the rolling gait of a very large animal moving with deliberate control, he crossed the kennel run and stopped at the gate threshold. He was close enough to the biscuit to smell it. He looked at the woman, not the biscuit. You had a hard few months, she said. Her voice was level. No performance of calm, just actual calm, which was different in a way that was difficult to explain but instantly recognizable. People kept trying to fix you. Nobody asked what was wrong. Titan's nostrils moved. You're not broken, she said. You're sad. And nobody gave you room to be sad, which made you angry, which made everyone more scared, which meant nobody would get close enough to sit with you while you were sad. Bit of a feedback loop. The dog put his head down and took the biscuit, ate it in one motion. She put another one down. Lucien, standing behind her and Marcus, became aware that he hadn't moved in 3 minutes. Also that Marcus, next to him, was holding his breath. By the time she put down the 4th biscuit, Titan was sitting. By the 6th, he was lying down with his massive head on his paws, watching her with an expression that Lucien had never seen on the animal's face before. It took him a moment to identify it: ease. When she scratched behind the dog's ear and Titan rolled onto his side with a grunt of pure physical contentment, Lucien turned and walked back toward the main house before she could turn around and see whatever expression had ended up on his face. He told Marcus to offer her a 2-week extension on the original 1-week consult and to increase the daily rate by 30%. Marcus relayed this. She accepted, though she apparently told Marcus that the money wasn't necessary and that she'd have stayed anyway because she wasn't finished with the dog's behavioral assessment and didn't like leaving cases incomplete. Marcus reported this to Lucien with the blank-faced delivery of a man who had learned to suppress his reactions in a professional context. Lucien listened and said nothing. She worked with Titan for 3 hours every morning and 2 in the late afternoon. She didn't use shock equipment or slip leads or the prong collars that two of the previous trainers had brought in their bags. She used the biscuits, a long, soft leash that she kept slack, and a voice that she modulated with a precision that Lucien, who spent his professional life calibrating tone and implication, found himself paying involuntary attention to. She also talked constantly. Not commands, conversations. Long, rambling, often fairly ridiculous one-sided conversations that she seemed to be delivering as much for her own amusement as the dog's, and that covered an apparently unlimited range of subjects. A rescue Labrador she'd worked with the previous spring, who'd had a particular terror of umbrellas, her ongoing dispute with a neighbor over parking boundaries, the structural problems with a particular style of harness that the market kept producing despite its obvious design flaws, the precise ratio of oat flour to peanut butter that Titan's biscuits required for optimal texture. Titan listened to all of it with what could only be described as engaged interest. On the third day, one of the capos, Dino Ferrante, who had been with the family for 12 years and had approximately the emotional range of a parking meter, appeared at the edge of the kennel area during the afternoon session on the pretext of reviewing a property inspection. He stayed for 40 minutes. By the end, he was leaning on the fence asking her questions about a rescue event she'd mentioned in passing, and she was answering with the easy warmth of someone who'd never met a stranger, and Dino Ferrante was, Lucien blinked to confirm what he was seeing, laughing. Actually laughing. Not the thin performance laugh that men in their position produced when required. An actual laugh, surprised out of him, at something she'd said about a basset hound she'd once transported across 4 state lines in a Volkswagen with a broken air conditioner. That evening at the security debrief, 3 different men found reasons to reference something Marlowe had said or done that day. None of them seemed to notice they were doing it. Lucien began conducting his morning walk of the property 10 minutes later than usual, which happened to coincide with the beginning of her first session with Titan. He told himself this was coincidence. He was a man who had survived this long partially because he was fluent in the language of self-deception, and he deployed that fluency now with practiced efficiency. On the 4th morning, she was working Titan through a modified off-leash recall exercise in the east courtyard when she came around the corner of the garden wall and nearly collided with him. She stopped 2 feet short, her hand coming up reflexively, and Titan planted himself between them with the automatic positioning of an animal that had decided it had a job. "Sorry," she said. "He does that." She was slightly out of breath from the run. There was a smear of something on her left sleeve that was either peanut butter or a variant thereof. Her hair was escaping its ponytail in ways that seemed to be entirely beside the point to her. "Are you—" She was doing the assessment people did when they encountered someone on a property and didn't know their role. "Sorry, I don't think we've actually met. I'm Marlowe. I'm working with Titan." "I know," he said. She waited. He was aware that he should say his name and didn't, and that the pause was getting long, and that she was now looking at him with the particular attention of someone recalibrating. "You're the principal," she said. Not a question. "Lucien Vescari." She looked at him for another moment with an expression that wasn't impressed and wasn't afraid and wasn't performing either of those things. "Your dog is doing really well," she said. "I want to be straight with you about that. He's not a problem dog. He's a dog who had a loss and wasn't given tools to process it, and developed some compensatory behaviors that your people then responded to with aversion training, which made the compensatory behaviors worse. It's a recoverable situation." Lucien looked at Titan, who was still positioned between them and showing no signs of repositioning. "He's never done that before," he said, indicating the placement. She looked down at Titan, then back at him. "He's decided you're worth protecting," she said, "and he's decided I need looking after. He's trying to cover both assignments." She said it with the matter-of-fact warmth of someone reporting a weather forecast. "He'll sort it out eventually. You'll have to earn a higher clearance level than me." Lucien looked at his own dog, who was looking up at Marlowe with the quiet devotion of a convert. "How long will that take?" he said. "For the dog?" She considered. "Couple weeks. For the positioning habit. Might just be permanent. Some of them decide your family, and that's that." She called Titan off with a soft sound and a hand signal, and the dog moved aside immediately. She gave Lucien a small nod that wasn't quite a bow and wasn't quite casual, then continued across the courtyard with Titan matching her pace exactly. Lucien stood in the garden for a moment longer than he needed to. Then he went back inside and had Marcus reschedule his 9 o'clock. By the end of the first week, the property had changed in ways that were difficult to quantify but impossible to miss. The conference room on the second floor, which had always operated under a specific species of tension, the particular atmospheric pressure of a room full of armed men who were paid to manage competing dangers, had somehow acquired a tin of homemade dog treats on the credenza behind the main table. Nobody admitted to putting them there. Nobody removed them. By Thursday, it was normal to reach for one during a prolonged discussion, the way people in other offices reached for a coffee cup. The bodyguard rotation, which Lucien had always kept on a strict and documented schedule to prevent the development of informal social clusters that could compromise loyalty matrices, was showing unexpected deviation. Not in the security coverage, that remained precise, but in the off-duty patterns. 3 separate men had rearranged personal schedules to be in proximity to the kennel area during Marlowe's afternoon sessions. The stated reasons were operational. The actual reason was visible from approximately 30 yards. She made people feel like talking. There was no other way to put it. She had a quality of attention, an actual listening quality, not the performed listening that people used to seem engaged while they were thinking about something else, that made men who hadn't talked about anything personal in years find themselves 3 sentences into a story about a childhood dog before they registered they'd started. Lucien observed this from sufficient distance to maintain plausible non-participation. He observed it during the morning walks that had shifted to accommodate her schedule. He observed it during the afternoon security briefings, which now routinely included at least one piece of information about Titan's behavioral progress that had no operational relevance whatsoever. He did not observe it up close, because up close he'd found that the same quality that made his men talk made him aware that he had not said anything genuine to another person in a very long time, and this awareness had a discomfort to it that he didn't immediately know what to do with. On the 9th day, Celeste Ashcroft arrived for dinner. Lucien had known Celeste for 11 years. Their relationship existed in the specific register of 2 powerful families' ongoing negotiation: her family's old money and political connections, his family's less formal empire, a long-standing mutual understanding that a formal alliance between them made sense to everyone who stood to benefit from it. They'd had dinner 17 times in the past 2 years. He'd escorted her to 3 charity events. She was cultured, controlled, and strategically positioned, and she understood the world he moved in without requiring explanation. She also understood, in the way that such women always understood without being told explicitly, that there was a timeline on the informal negotiation between them and that she was tracking its progress. She arrived at 7 with a bottle of wine that had probably cost more than Marlowe's Subaru, wearing a dress the color of old gold that made every man in the entryway look once, and then immediately pretend they hadn't. Lucien took her coat, led her to the dining room, poured the wine. She talked about her last trip to Milan. He listened with the correct portion of his attention. She asked about the property expansion, and he gave answers that were informative without being specific. They moved through the motions of a dinner that both understood served a function, and he found himself, not for the first time, noting that he felt nothing in particular and attributing this to the general emotional flattening that his life tended to produce in people who stayed in it long enough. Celeste brought up the dog trainer at dessert. "The new girl," she said, in the tone of someone who had prepared the phrasing. "I saw her from the car. Is she working out?" "She's effective," Lucien said. Celeste turned her wine glass once on the tablecloth. "I imagine she's a bit of an adjustment. New presence on the property." "The staff seems to have adjusted," he said. "Yes." Celeste looked at him over the rim of the glass. "I've noticed." The observation was precise and it was designed to land a specific way, and Lucien felt it land with the accuracy of someone who had placed it carefully. He said nothing. He was very good at saying nothing. "I only mention it," Celeste said, "because it's unusual. For you to keep someone on the property this long, someone from outside." "Titan required an extended intervention," he said. She set the glass down. "Of course." They finished dessert. He walked her to the car. She accepted his kiss on the cheek with a warmth that was slightly more pressed than usual, and he stood in the driveway as the car took her down the main drive, and he noticed that he was still thinking about a sentence Marlowe had said that morning about the difference between a dog that learns compliance and a dog that develops trust, and how you could see the difference immediately in the way they moved, and how compliance always looked like suppression, and trust looked like the animal being fully in its own body. He went back inside and stood in the study for a while with the lights off, which was not something he normally did. The music box had been in the Vescari family for 60 years. It wasn't especially valuable by collector standards. The mechanism was hand-built, the inlay work was good, but not exceptional. The case was rosewood and brass with a small landscape painted on the interior lid by someone whose name was no longer known. What it was the last thing his grandmother had touched the morning she died, in the room that had since become his study, in the bed that had since become the study's sitting area. She'd wound it herself. It had been playing when they found her. The song was a folk melody from somewhere in the coastal south of Italy, his grandfather's home region, and it was the only song it played. It lived on the credenza behind his desk. He'd never moved it. He noticed it was gone on a Friday morning at 8:12, reaching for his phone charger and catching the empty space in his peripheral vision. He stood for a moment looking at the space, the particular emotional quality of which he was not going to examine right now, and called Marcus. "The box from the study," he said. "Who's been in this room since Wednesday?" Marcus's answer, after the appropriate pause of a man checking logs, produced a list of 4 people. All of them were trusted staff who'd been on the property for years, and Marlowe, who had come in Wednesday afternoon to pick up the leash extension that she'd left on the bookshelf during Titan's indoor desensitization session. "Run the interior camera log," Lucian said. "Already pulled," Marcus said. "There's a gap. 47 minutes Wednesday afternoon. The secondary server logged an override." Lucien put the phone down very carefully and looked at the empty credenza for a long moment. He was not going to assume. He was not going to feel what he was currently in danger of feeling. He was going to move deliberately and look at the footage from the primary archive and find out what the 47-minute gap was covering for. He was also somewhere below the level where he made rational decisions, becoming aware that the thought of Marlowe taking that music box produced a specific nausea that had nothing to do with theft. It had to do with the possibility of being wrong about something he hadn't realized he'd decided. The primary archive was offline. Maintenance window, routinely scheduled, wouldn't be accessible until Monday. "Find her," he said to Marcus. "Not to detain, to inform. I need to speak with her." Marcus went. Lucian stood at the window and looked at the east tree line and did not let himself feel anything particular about the next 48 hours. He was not successful at this. But she was at the kennel when Marcus found her, in the middle of Titan's afternoon session, teaching the dog a new sound cue for Settle using a soft whistle and a hand gesture. Titan, who had not settled on command in 3 years of professional training, performed the gesture on the second repetition and folded himself onto the ground with the resigned grace of a very large dog who had decided to cooperate. Marcus told her the music box was missing. She went still the way a person went still when something landed wrong. Not the stillness of guilt, but the stillness of shock. Titan felt it immediately and came up onto his feet, pressing his side against her leg. I came in Wednesday to get the leash extension. I didn't go near his desk." Her voice was level but thin. "I didn't take anything." "Mr. Vescari is aware," Marcus said, which meant nothing, which was exactly what Marcus intended it to mean. She looked at Titan. She looked at the kennel. She looked at the late afternoon sky with the expression of a person doing the math on a situation and not liking the answer. "I should go," she said. "Mr. Vescari would like to speak with you first," Marcus said. "I think," she said quietly, "that I'd rather just go. I'll put the full session notes in the shared file. Everything Titan needs going forward is documented." She reached down and put her hand on the dog's head once, not a training gesture, just a touch. "He'll be okay. He's done the hard part." She picked up her bag and walked toward the gate. Titan moved. The dog crossed the kennel floor in 3 strides, placed himself at the gate ahead of her, and stood. Not aggressive, but absolute. The posture of an animal that had made a decision and was not currently entertaining alternatives. She stopped. "Titan." Her voice was soft. "Move." Titan looked at her and did not move. She tried the gate latch. his shoulder pressed against it from the inside without shift in his expression or his stance. From the doorway of the main house, Lucien watched. He'd come down because Marcus had radioed. He stood at the edge of the courtyard, coat on, hands in his pockets, watching his dog refuse to let this woman leave the property. Watching the enormous animal that had spent 8 months deciding the entire world was hostile station himself at a gate with the specific intention of keeping one person inside it. Marlowe turned and looked across the courtyard. Found Lucienne. Her expression did the thing he'd learned to watch for. The private thing. The thing not performed. What was on her face wasn't anger, and wasn't fear, and wasn't quite hurt, though hurt was somewhere in the territory. "Tell your dog to move," she said. "Please." Lucien walked across the courtyard toward them. He stopped 6 feet from the gate and looked at Titan and said, "Titan, off!" Titan looked at him, looked back at Marlowe, looked at Lucien again with an expression that was, if an animal's face could carry it, entirely unimpressed with the instruction. Then the dog lay down across the gate threshold and put his head on his paws. Lucien stood looking at his own dog for a moment. "He's never ignored a direct command," Marcus said, from somewhere behind him. "I know," Lucien said. He looked at Marlowe, who was looking at Titan with an expression that, despite everything, despite the music box and the camera gap and the position she was in and the one she was trying to leave from, was full of something that looked like startled tenderness. "He knows something's wrong," she said quietly. "He doesn't want me to leave when something's wrong." She looked up at Lucien. "He's been like this since the first week. He knows things." Lucien looked at the dog. He looked at the woman. He thought about the music box and the 47-minute gap and the footage he couldn't access until Monday, and the fact that he was standing here while every rational professional instinct he possessed was telling him to treat this the way he treated everything else, with the controlled, systematic, unsentimental processing of information until clarity emerged. But his dog was lying across a gate to prevent her from walking away, and Titan hadn't been wrong about a person yet. "Stay," Lucien said. Not to the dog. Marlowe looked at him. "Until Monday," he said. "The primary footage will be available. I'm not asking you to wait because I think you're guilty." He said the words with the specific deliberateness of a man who did not say things he didn't mean. "I'm asking because I think there's something else in that footage, and I think if you walk out of here tonight, whoever actually took it will have accomplished exactly what they intended." The courtyard was quiet. Somewhere above them, 2 floors up on the south side of the main house, Lucien registered a movement at a window. A curtain, probably. Someone watching. He didn't look up. He kept his eyes on Marlowe, who was standing with her bag over one shoulder and her hand on Titan's head, and the expression of someone deciding whether to trust a thing that their better judgment had significant reservations about. Titan's tail moved once against the concrete. "One condition," she said. "Name it." "I want to know what's actually in that footage before anyone else does. Not a summary from Marcus. Not a report. You tell me yourself." He held her gaze for a moment. "Yes," he said. She set her bag down. Titan's tail moved twice more, slow and deliberate, as if the dog had just watched something conclude the way it was supposed to, and was registering appropriate satisfaction. Above them, at the second-floor window of the south wing, the curtain moved back into place. The hand that had been holding it was elegant and controlled, and the woman it belonged to stood in the darkened guest room with a face that had gone very still, doing the same rapid calculation that Lucien had just done, and arriving at a very different and considerably more urgent conclusion. The music box was still in her travel bag, wrapped in a silk scarf, and Monday was 3 days away. 3 days was enough time. It had to be. The guest room they gave her was on the 3rd floor, east wing, with a view of the kennel block and the tree line beyond it. It was larger than her apartment. The bed had 4 pillows. There was a sitting area with a lamp that probably cost more than her car, and a bathroom with heated floors that she discovered by accident at 2 in the morning when she couldn't sleep and stood on the tile and felt the warmth come up through her soles and thought, absurdly, about how many dogs she could bathe in a tub this size. She didn't sleep much. She lay on top of the covers with her shoes off and her phone face down on the nightstand, running through the Wednesday afternoon sequence in her head with the specific obsessive clarity that came with knowing someone thought you'd done something you hadn't. The leash extension, the bookshelf. The door open, light from the window, the smell of coffee from downstairs. She hadn't gone near the desk. She'd been in the room for maybe 4 minutes. She'd said hello to the framed photograph on the wall. An old one, black and white, a man and woman she didn't recognize, because she said hello to things when she was alone in rooms, a habit she'd had since childhood that she'd stopped apologizing for. She had not touched the music box. She had not touched anything on that credenza. She'd seen the box. Rosewood, small, distinctive, because you notice things in a room like that, a room that was trying to be austere and revealing itself as deeply personal anyway. She'd noticed it and moved on. Somewhere in this building, someone else had noticed it too, and had done something about it, and had afterward arranged for the story to move in her direction. She stared at the ceiling and tried to think about who that was, and came up with a name she wasn't ready to say out loud, and spent the rest of the night trying to talk herself out of it, and mostly failing. Saturday morning arrived gray and damp, with low clouds that sat on the tree line, like something that couldn't decide whether to commit to rain. Marlowe dressed in the same clothes she'd had on the day before, which was not a situation she loved, and went down to the kennel at 6:30 because Titan needed his morning routine regardless of anything else that was happening. He was already at the gate when she arrived, sitting, not pacing, his version of good morning, which had taken 8 days to establish, and which she felt, looking at his broad dark face in the flat morning light, like something she'd been given without earning. "Yeah," she said, opening the gate. "Me too." She worked him for an hour. The settle cue held. The recall was clean. She ran him through the new targeting exercise she'd introduced Thursday, and he performed it with the cheerful precision of an animal that was now doing it because he wanted to, rather than because he was being compelled to. And the difference between those two things was, as far as she was concerned, the only thing worth understanding about behavior. She was toweling his face. He submitted to this with the resigned dignity of a creature who found the process undignified, but had accepted it as part of the arrangement, when she heard footsteps on the path. Not Marcus's step. Marcus moved like a man who had decided years ago that the purpose of moving from one place to another was exclusively to arrive, no information transmitted in transit. These footsteps were different, slower, more deliberate in a way that wasn't caution, more like a person who was walking towards something they'd already decided to do and were giving themselves the last few seconds of the not yet done. Lucian came around the corner of the kennel block with 2 cups of coffee, one of which he held out to her without preamble. She looked at it, took it. "I owe you information," he said. "You owe me Monday," she said, "but I'll take the coffee." He leaned against the fence and watched Titan, who had settled himself against Marlowe's left leg, and was watching Lucian with the new expression, the one that wasn't quite possessive and wasn't quite peacekeeping, but was positioned precisely between them in a way that was starting to feel like editorial commentary from the dog. "The gap in the secondary system was deliberate," Lucian said. "Someone with property-level access created it. That narrows the field." "How narrow?" "Narrow enough that it should have been easy." He turned the coffee cup once in his hand. "It isn't, because the people with that access are people I've trusted for a long time, and the only one who doesn't fit is—" He stopped. She looked at him. He had the face of someone who had trained his expressions into a very controlled vocabulary, and he was currently saying something his face knew he hadn't finished thinking through. "Tell me," she said. "You had a visitor Friday evening," he said, "while you were in the East Wing. Someone came through the secondary corridor. The log shows a keycard entry that doesn't belong to staff." She processed this. "Celeste Ashcroft has a keycard?" His jaw moved once. "She's been a guest on the property frequently enough that she was issued a limited access credential 18 months ago. And Friday evening. She used it," he said, "at 9:47. She was in and out in under 12 minutes. Marlowe looked at Titan. The dog was still watching Lucian with the focused attention of an animal who had opinions. She drank her coffee and let the silence take up the space it needed. "You know it was her," she said finally. I know she accessed the property on Friday evening. I know the camera gap coincides with Wednesday afternoon. I know those two things together tell a specific story. He paused. I don't know it. Not the way a person can know something and act on it. Monday, she said. Monday. She nodded once. She was looking at the tree line now, at the gray morning light coming through the lower branches, at nothing in particular. Her coffee was getting cold and she didn't care. She's been on the property before, Marlowe said. Not as a guest. Socially, I mean. You two are... She stopped herself because that sentence had a trajectory she wasn't going to complete out loud. It's a long-standing arrangement, Lucian said. The words were flat in the way that things went flat when they'd been examined too many times and had stopped producing any particular feeling. Between families, it has a context I'm not going to explain. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. They stood with that for a moment. Titan yawned enormously, which broke the particular atmospheric weight of the preceding 30 seconds, with the casual efficiency that only a dog who is entirely unimpressed by human emotional complexity can achieve. Marlowe laughed, short and involuntary, and then stopped laughing because the morning was still gray and none of the actual situation had changed. She doesn't like me, Marlowe said. No. Not because of the dog. He looked at her, direct, the way he looked at things when he'd decided to look at them. No. She held his gaze for a moment, then looked back at Titan. That's a problem, she said, because what she did with the music box, that's not jealousy anymore. That's a plan. And a plan like that doesn't stop at the first move. Inside the main house, 3 floors up in the south wing, Celeste Ashcroft was having a conversation on her phone that she would later wish she'd had from a different location. The wall construction of the Viscari estate was good. Thick plaster, old materials, the acoustic insularity of a building that had been built to keep conversations inside rooms. But the south wing heating vents ran along a shared return channel with the security monitoring room on the second floor, and the monitoring room was staffed on Saturdays by a man named Raph, who had learned years ago that sometimes you heard things you weren't supposed to hear, and that the correct response to this depended entirely on which direction the information flowed. Raph listened for 90 seconds, then picked up his radio. Marcus found Lucian in the kennel yard at 7:48 and relayed what Raph had reported. He did it quietly, without inflection, standing close enough that the words went directly from him to Lucian without passing through the available air. Lucian listened without expression. What Raph had heard, Celeste, on the phone with someone, a man, voice unidentified, saying that the box needed to be moved, that the location she'd chosen was too obvious once the footage was reviewed, that it needed to be somewhere with Marlowe's direct handprint on it if possible, and that she had until Monday, and that if this didn't resolve cleanly, she was prepared to escalate. Lucien set his coffee cup on the fence post. He did it carefully, the way a person moved carefully when they were managing something that was trying to be something else. Who was she talking to? He said. We're running the number, Marcus said. It'll take a few hours. Get me a name before noon. Marcus nodded and moved. Lucien stood at the fence for a moment. The gray morning light sat on everything. Titan, from inside the kennel, watched him with the steady attention of an animal that could feel something shifting in the atmospheric pressure of the yard. Marlowe was at the far end of the run, giving the dog space to decompress post-session, her back half turned, her attention apparently on the tree line. But Lucien knew, with the particular certainty of someone who had spent 11 days watching the way she managed the space between herself and the people in it, that she'd heard every word Marcus had said. She turned. What does escalate mean? She said. From her. What does that actually mean? Lucien looked at her. Dad. He was aware of the choice point, the place where he could shape what he said into something that protected her from the specific texture of the world she was standing in the middle of, or he could tell her the exact truth. And the exact truth was that Celeste Ashcroft had connections and resources and a social reach that could be deployed as a weapon in ways that ranged from reputational to considerably more material. It means she has options, he said, and she's considering them. That's not an answer. It's the answer I can give you without frightening you. She looked at him with an expression that was sharp and flat at the same time. I've been frightened before. I'd rather be frightened and informed than calm and blindsided. She crossed her arms. What does she have on you? What does she have that she could threaten with? He said nothing. Because this isn't about the music box, she said. She doesn't care about a music box. She cares about making you choose between protecting her and protecting me. And whatever she's got, whoever she was talking to, that's the thing underneath. The box is just the mechanism. The accuracy of this landed with a specific weight. He'd been thinking it himself in the controlled silent space he kept for problems that didn't resolve quickly, but hearing it laid out in her voice, direct, unadorned, factually organized, was different from thinking it. Yes, he said. So what does she have? He looked at the tree line. He looked at the dog. He looked at the woman who had arrived at his property 4 minutes late with homemade dog treats and had proceeded in 11 days to restructure the atmosphere of a place that had been running on controlled fear for years. He thought about what it meant to tell her, what it opened, what it meant that he was considering it. She has evidence, he said carefully, of a business arrangement from 4 years ago, one that a particular federal agency would find interesting. Marlowe was quiet for a moment. How interesting? Structurally interesting, he said. Not operationally, but the structure is enough. She nodded once. She was doing the math. He could see her doing it. The reassessment that anyone did when the actual weight of a thing came into focus, when what had seemed like a crime drama backdrop resolved into something with real texture and real consequence. He watched her face for the thing that usually appeared at this point: fear, withdrawal, the pre-exit recalibration. What appeared was something else, steady, tired, not naive. Okay, she said. Okay, he repeated. What are you going to do? I'm going to wait for the name from the call, he said, and then I'm going to understand exactly what she's built, and then I'm going to dismantle it. He said this the way he said most things, without emphasis, without performance, in the register of a man reporting what was going to happen rather than declaring intent. She looked at him for a long moment. And me. You stay, he said. You stay until Monday and the footage is pulled and this resolves the way it's going to resolve. And if it doesn't resolve the way it's going to resolve, it will. That's not, it will, he said again, and the flatness of it was different this time. Not dismissal, but the specific weight of someone who has managed difficult outcomes long enough to know what certainty actually sounds like. I don't lose things I've decided to keep. The sentence hung in the gray morning air for a moment. He hadn't intended it to carry what it was apparently carrying. He registered this the way he registered most things he hadn't intended, by not looking at it directly. Titan, from the kennel, let out one low sound. Not distress. Something else. Marlowe's expression did the private thing again, the involuntary thing, and she looked away before he could read all of it. I need to document this morning's session, she said, and went toward the kennel door, and he stood in the gray yard and watched her go, and said nothing further, and the cold was coming up through the gravel into his shoes, and he didn't move. The name came through at 11:43. Marcus put it on a single sheet and handed it to Lucien in the study. Lucien read it once. He set the sheet on the desk. He read it again. The name was Dorian Price, which meant the situation had just become considerably more complicated because Dorian Price was not some peripheral contact of Celeste's social circle. Dorian Price was the senior legal counsel for the Harwick Group, which was a holding company that Lucy's organization had used for 3 consecutive years as a clean vehicle for a specific set of transactions, and which Price ran with a discretion that everyone had relied on and nobody had verified was as absolute as advertised. If Price was in contact with Celeste, it meant 2 things. First, that Celeste's threat wasn't theoretical. She actually had access to the documentary structure of the Harwick arrangement, not just knowledge of its existence. Second, that Price had made a choice about where his loyalty sat, and that the choice was not where Lucien had spent 3 years and considerable money, assuming it sat. He stood at the window for a while. The rain had started, finally committing to the gray morning suggestion. It came down straight and heavy on the gravel in the kennel roof and the east tree line, and he watched it and did the kind of thinking that had no visible movement to it. The problem was not Celeste. Celeste was a manageable problem. Celeste had done a stupid, reactive thing because she was frightened and her position had been threatened, and people in that state made moves that were emotionally legible even when they were strategically foolish. He could understand her and route around her. Price was a different order of problem. Price had made a calculated choice, which meant Price had a reason, which meant there was something else in the Harwick arrangement that Lucien didn't know about yet, something that Price had decided made defection more valuable than loyalty. He picked up his phone and called a number he kept in his head rather than in the contacts list. The call lasted 4 minutes. By the end of it, he knew 3 additional things. That Price had been approached by an investigative unit operating out of the state AG's office approximately 6 weeks ago, that the approach had included an immunity conversation, and that Price had been feeding documentation in increments since. 6 weeks. The timeline sat on him with a specific heaviness. 6 weeks ago, Marlo Bennett had not been on his property. The timing had nothing to do with her. Whatever Price was building had been in motion before she arrived, before the camera gap, before the music box. Celeste hadn't created the vulnerability. She'd found one that already existed and decided to use it as leverage, possibly without fully understanding what she was actually touching, which meant Marlo was standing in the middle of something she had walked into without any instrument for measuring it. He put the phone down and went down the corridor toward the east wing. He knocked on the guest room door. She opened it immediately, which meant she'd been awake and probably not sitting. She was in yesterday's clothes still. Her hair was down. She looked at him and read something in his face that he hadn't calibrated yet. "Tell me," she said. He told her. Not everything. Not the specific shape of what Price was building, not the layers under the Harwick arrangement that she didn't need and wasn't equipped to navigate, but the essential structure, that Celeste's escalation threat was real, that it was connected to something larger than a stolen music box, and that the situation had changed from an uncomfortable weekend hold to something that required active management. She stood in the doorway and listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "You're telling me this because you want me to understand why I need to stay put," she said. "I'm telling you because you asked me to," he said. "You said frightened and informed." She exhaled through her nose. "I did say that." She looked past him into the corridor, then back at him. "Is she going to try something before Monday?" "I think she's going to try something tonight," he said. "I think she's going to try to move the box to a location that's unambiguously connected to you, so that when the footage runs Monday, the placement creates a secondary narrative even if the original theft is visible." "Where would she put it?" "Your car," he said. "Or your bag. Somewhere you left unattended." She was quiet again. The rain was loud on the window glass behind her. He was aware of the hallway's narrowness, of the proximity the conversation required, of the fact that he'd come up here without Marcus and without a plan beyond telling her the truth. "Okay," she said. "Then I want my bag with me, the canvas one. It's been down in the kennel supply room since this morning." "I'll get it." "I'm coming with you." He looked at her. She was standing with the particular posture of someone who was tired and aware of being tired and not letting it translate into softness. It was a posture he recognized. He'd been wearing it for years. "All right," he said. They went downstairs together, and in the supply room off the kennel corridor they found her canvas bag on the shelf where she'd left it, and they found, tucked into the outer pocket with the careful invisibility of something placed by a practiced hand, a rosewood and brass music box, wrapped in a silk scarf, the color of old gold. Marlo went very still. Lucien looked at the music box. He looked at her face. He looked at the scarf, which he recognized because he'd seen it before, around the neck of a woman who'd arrived last Saturday evening with a bottle of wine and a very particular understanding of what she was negotiating for. "Don't touch it," he said. "I wasn't going to." "Marcus," he said, into the radio. "Kennel supply room. Bring the evidence kit." His voice was level. His voice was always level, but his jaw had tightened in the specific way it did when something had moved past the point of being a problem to be managed and had become something that required a different kind of response entirely. Marlo was looking at the music box with an expression that cycled quickly through something that might have been shock and came out the other side as a very cold and very specific anger. Not directed at him, directed at something she was now allowing herself to see clearly for the first time. "She was in this room," Marlowe said. "Yes. While we were—" She stopped, recalculated. "She knew where my bag was." "Yes. She's been watching the schedule, my schedule, Titan's schedule." She turned and looked at him. "How long has she been on the property today?" "She arrived at 9 this morning," he said. "I assumed she came to—" He stopped. "To watch," Marlowe said. "To make sure it was placed. To confirm." He looked at the music box in his grandmother's silk scarf and felt something that his professional life had spent 20 years training him not to feel in active situations. Fury. Not the cold, managed fury that was a tool. The kind that came from somewhere below the tool rack. "She's still here," he said. "Yes," said Marcus from the doorway. "She's in the east sitting room with Dino." Lucien turned. "Don't move her," he said. "Don't let her know we found it. I want the kit on this bag. I want the scarf logged, and I want every camera on the south wing reviewed from midnight last night forward." He looked at Marlowe. "You're going to stay in this room until Marcus is done. Then you're going to come upstairs and stay in the east wing with the door locked until I come for you." She looked at him. "And what are you going to do?" "I'm going to go have a conversation with someone who made a very serious mistake," he said. "And I'm going to keep my voice down while I do it." He left the supply room. His footsteps on the corridor floor were measured and even and entirely controlled. Marlowe stood by the shelving with the music box between them and Marcus coming through the door with the kit, and she thought about the word mistake, and she thought about what that word meant in a house like this, and she thought about Monday, which now felt like it was a very long time away and arriving very fast at the same time. And she understood. Standing in the concrete-floored supply room with rain coming down hard outside and a brass-fitted music box wrapped in someone else's scarf, sitting 3 feet from her hands, that the situation had just crossed a line from which none of the people involved were going to walk back to where they'd started. There was no version of Monday that looked like before. The east sitting room smelled like her perfume and fresh coffee and the particular kind of performance that people put on when they'd decided in advance how a scene was going to go. Celeste Ashcroft was seated on the low settee near the window, one leg crossed over the other, a cup of coffee balanced on her knee, with the practiced ease of a woman who had been trained since childhood to occupy rooms as though they belonged to her. Dino Ferrante sat across from her in the armchair, looking exactly like what he was. A man who had been making conversation for 40 minutes with someone he didn't like, doing it out of professional obligation, and was running low on the social reserves required to keep the performance going. He stood when Lucienne came in. Celeste did not. "Lucienne," she smiled. The smile was warm and perfectly placed and reached approximately the outer layer of her eyes. "I was wondering when you'd come down. Dino's been keeping me excellent company." Dino looked at Lucienne with the expression of a man who had not, in fact, been keeping excellent company, and withdrew from the room with the efficiency of someone who recognized a threshold and had been waiting for permission to cross it. Lucienne closed the door. He didn't sit. He stood near the door with his hands in his jacket pockets and looked at her, and the looking was long enough and direct enough that the smile did something at its edges. A microscopic recalibration. The face of a person who had prepared for a version of this scene and was now registering that the version being performed was different from the one they'd rehearsed. "You're angry," she said. Still the warm register. Still the conversational confidence. "Lucienne, I understand if you're angry." "Tell me about Dorian Price," he said. The room went quiet in a specific way. Celeste's coffee cup moved from her knee to the side table in a motion that was almost natural. Almost. The transition took about a half-second longer than a genuinely casual movement would have. "I don't know what you—" "Celeste." His voice didn't rise. It did something else. It lost the last of whatever ambient warmth it ordinarily carried, becoming something with no texture at all, clean and flat as a floor. "I've been doing this for 20 years. Don't." She looked at him. He watched her run through the available options: denial, redirection, partial admission with favorable framing, and watched her clock that none of them were going to work, and watched her make a different choice. Her spine straightened by about half an inch. Her chin came up slightly. She reached for the social register she used when she was pivoting from charm to something with harder edges underneath. Dorian contacted me, she said, 6 weeks ago. He reached out because he had concerns about the Harwick arrangement, and he thought I should know about them. He contacted you, Lucienne repeated. A man who handles legal documentation for my organization called you, out of a professional context you've never been part of, to share concerns. He let that sit for 1 second. Why would he do that? Her jaw shifted slightly. Because he knew that I had an interest in your well-being, and because he thought, what did you give him? I didn't give him anything. What did you give him, Celeste? Still flat? Still quiet? Because Price has been running documentation to an AG investigative unit for 6 weeks, and the things he's been running require access that Price, on his own, doesn't have. He has the Harwick structure. He doesn't have the upstream source. Someone gave him the upstream source. He looked at her. That conversation was about access, something you had that he wanted. What was it? Her coffee sat untouched on the side table. Outside the window, the rain was coming down heavy and straight, and the garden was dark with it, the gravel turning to wet slate, and the gray light made the room look like a photograph taken in a season when everything was about to change. You were never going to choose me, she said. Her voice had changed. The warmth was fully gone now, and what was under it was something drier and more stripped, older. I want you to understand that. I want you to understand that I have been in a very particular position for 3 years, conducting myself with absolute patience and discretion, holding up an expectation that you've never once made explicit and never once withdrawn, and I was doing it because I genuinely believed, that was who we were to each other. And then that woman walked onto your property with dog biscuits in her backpack, and in 11 days you looked at her the way you have never looked at me once. The room took that sentence and held it. Lucian stood with his hands in his pockets and let it land without deflecting it, because it was true and he owed her that much. To not flinch away from the true thing she was saying while being completely clear about what it changed. That's real, he said, and it doesn't change what you did. What I did, she said, and now there was something thinner in it, something that had pulled so tight it was close to breaking, was try to protect an investment I'd made in good faith. You gave a federal informant access to documents that put people I'm responsible for in the path of a criminal prosecution, he said. People who've been loyal to this family for years. That's not protection. That's a bomb. He looked at her directly. And then you framed an innocent woman for a theft you committed in my grandmother's study. The word grandmother landed somewhere. He watched it land. A flicker in her expression, not guilt exactly, but the specific discomfort of someone confronting a cruelty they'd managed not to fully look at until now. I was going to move it, she said, before Monday. I had a plan. We found it, he said, in her bag, an hour ago, in my grandmother's scarf. The color left her face in a way that wasn't performed. She'd been working with the assumption that Monday was still in play, that she still had the 48 hours she'd calculated on, that the situation was still in the shape she'd built it in. The shape had just collapsed, and he watched her understand this with the particular quality of attention that had gotten him through 20 years of exactly this kind of moment. The moment when another person's plan fell apart, and you needed to see exactly how they responded to falling. She stood up. Her hands were controlled. Her voice, when it came, was controlled. Lucienne, Marcus is going to drive you to the Ashcroft house, he said. Tonight. You're going to stay there. You're not going to contact Price. You're not going to take any action with whatever you currently have, because whatever you currently have, I'm going to find and I'm going to manage it. And if you make a move before I've done that, the thing you set in motion with the AG unit is going to hit this family before I can put anything between it and the people it will hurt. He moved to the door, put his hand on it. And the people it will hurt are not me. She stood in the middle of the room with the composure of a woman who had been built for hard moments and was deploying that construction now because there was nothing else available. I loved you, she said. Not theatrical, quiet. The quietest thing she'd said in the whole conversation. He looked at her for a moment. I know, he said. I'm sorry that wasn't enough. I should have said that a long time ago, and I didn't, and that's mine. He opened the door. But it doesn't change what you did. He left her standing by the window with the rain coming down outside and Marcus waiting in the corridor, and he walked down the hall with the particular heaviness of a man who had just closed a door on something that had been open too long and felt neither relief nor satisfaction about it. Upstairs in the east wing, Marlowe sat on the floor of the guest room with her back against the bed and her knees up, and Titan's head in her lap. The dog had come up with her, trailing Marcus before Marcus peeled off at the second landing, and had settled himself across her legs with the specific gravity of an animal that understood the function it was performing, even if it couldn't be said to be performing it consciously. She was cold. The room wasn't cold. The heat was on. The floors were warm. But there was a cold that had nothing to do with temperature. The cold of sitting with the full knowledge of a situation and understanding that it was considerably larger than what you'd walked into. She thought about her apartment. The landlord who'd been patient with the last month's rent because he'd known her for 6 years and liked her yellow lab, who'd been dead for 2 years now. The stack of client files on her kitchen table. The bag of homemade biscuits she'd been refilling weekly from a recipe she'd been modifying for 8 years toward a formulation that worked for trauma-affected dogs with sensitive digestion. The very ordinary, very specific smallness of her life, which had suited her, which she'd built deliberately, which she was currently not in. Titan pushed his nose against her hand. She moved her fingers automatically into the scruff behind his ears. You knew, she said to him, didn't you? This morning at the gate. You'd already figured it out. The dog's eyes moved to her face, heavy-lidded and certain. Yeah, she said. The knock at the door was Lucien's knock. She'd already learned the rhythm of it, which was a thing she noted without fully examining. She said, Come in. He came in and looked at the floor situation. Her, the dog, the arrangement of a person who'd been sitting still with something heavy for a while. He sat down in the chair by the window rather than trying to make her move. He looked tired in a way that his face generally refused to advertise, and was advertising now. She's leaving, he said. And price? I'm working on price. She looked at him. That sounds like it means something specific. It means I'm working on it, he said. She let that stand. The music box. Was it damaged? He looked slightly caught by the question, which was the first time she'd seen that expression on his face. No, it's fine. Good. She stroked Titan's ear. It plays a specific song. He looked at her directly. You knew that. I noticed it. When I was in your study, I didn't touch it, but I could see the inlay on the lid and the key at the back. She paused. It looked used, like someone wound it regularly. Every Sunday, he said. It was a habit. She nodded. She wasn't going to ask whose habit. She could see the answer in the way he said it. They sat with that for a moment, him in the chair and her on the floor and the dog between them doing its unofficial work, and the rain coming down outside filling the particular silence with enough ambient sound to make sitting in it bearable. You need to know something, he said. She waited. The price situation. The documents he's been moving to the AG unit. The coverage is wider than I told you this morning. He looked at his hands for a moment, then back at her. There's a timeline pressure. Things are going to move faster than Monday regardless of the footage. She felt something tighten in her chest. How much faster? I don't know the exact shape yet, but I need to make calls tonight that are going to make this property look different tomorrow. More activity. Different people. He paused. I want to be clear with you about what that means because you deserve to know what you're inside of. Tell me, she said. This isn't a private security company, he said. The room was very quiet. I know, she said. He looked at her. I've known since the third day, she said. I'm not unobservant. I know what a security company looks like. I know what this looks like. She met his gaze. I didn't leave because Titan wasn't done. And then I didn't leave because... She stopped, restarted. I didn't leave. He sat with this for a long moment. Outside, the rain shifted. A gust moved through it, bending it sideways against the window glass, and then it settled back to its straight vertical fall. You should have left, he said. Probably, she said. I'm historically bad at the point where I should leave something difficult. She looked down at Titan. Ask any of my clients. It wasn't quite a joke and wasn't quite not one. He didn't quite smile and didn't quite not. The gala is Saturday, he said. The Viscari Foundation event. It was planned months ago. 400 people. I can't cancel it without creating a specific kind of attention that makes the price situation worse. He looked at the window. I need everything to look normal through Saturday. And after Saturday. After Saturday, I'll know more about the shape of things. She was quiet for a moment. What do you need from me? He looked at her. The question had landed differently than she'd intended it, or maybe exactly as she'd intended it, and she wasn't currently sure which one she meant. He stopped, started again. Just stay visible. Work with Titan as scheduled. Talk to the staff the way you talk to them. He said the next part with the careful neutrality of a man delivering a sentence he'd composed deliberately. You have an effect on this place. It's a useful effect. I need things to feel normal. I'm good at normal, she said. I've noticed, he said. It's more unusual than you think. Chiging. At 11:40 that night, Lucien got the call that changed the shape of everything. He was in the study, at the desk, working through the Harwick documentation with the family's principal attorney, a small, precise man named Gerard, who had been with the Viscari operation for 15 years and who communicated primarily through the quality of his silences. When his phone lit up with a number he recognized as the contact 2 steps removed from a source inside the AG's investigative unit. He stepped into the corridor to take it. The call lasted 6 minutes. When it was done, he stood in the corridor with the phone at his side and the particular stillness of a man processing a thing that required very careful processing before it became action. Gerard appeared in the study doorway. Read Lucien's face. Bad. The gala, Lucien said. They're planning to move at the gala. Gerard was quiet for a moment. In what capacity? Price has arranged a handoff. Documents, physical copies, delivered to an AG representative who will be attending as a guest. Lucien turned and looked down the corridor. Someone on the guest list is an operative. Someone we've vetted and confirmed and sent an invitation to. He looked back at Gerard. We have 4 days to find out which one. And if we don't, then Saturday evening becomes a very different kind of event than the one we've planned. Gerard did the thing he did when the situation was serious. He became slightly more still, which was the only external indication he ever gave of internal escalation. You'll need to bring Dino in on this, and Raf. Yes. And the price problem needs to be isolated before the gala regardless of the guest list. If he's running documents, we need to know what he's already moved and what's still in motion. I know? Lucien. Gerard looked at him with the careful neutrality that was his primary mode. The girl. Lucien said nothing. She's been on the property for nearly 2 weeks, Gerard said. The AG unit will have noted that. Whatever they're building, she'll appear in the peripheral documentation. Her presence will need to be accounted for. She has nothing to do with this. That's irrelevant, Gerard said. Not unkindly, just flat. Relevance isn't the standard they use. Association is the standard they use. And she's been living in this house, working with this household, and has now been the subject of an internal investigation regarding stolen property. He paused. On paper, that looks like a specific thing. Lucien stood in the corridor with the phone still in his hand and the cold specificity of this settling across his shoulders like a weight that had been approaching for a while and had now arrived. What are you telling me? He said. I'm telling you that the cleanest path for her is to be off this property before Saturday. Gerard said it with the precision of a man delivering a medical prognosis. Accurate, unsentimental, not without its own particular compassion. Titan's behavioral assessment is technically complete. There's professional justification for the consultation ending. She leaves with a clean record, no connection to the weekend's events, no peripheral exposure. She didn't do anything. That's still irrelevant, Gerard said. Innocent people appear in case files. It doesn't feel like it should be true. It is true. Lucien looked at the study door. Through it, the credenza where the music box had been returned this evening. Marcus had placed it back himself, carefully, the silk scarf folded beside it. Through the wall, somewhere above, the east wing. Third floor. A woman asleep or awake in a room that had once been a guest room and had in 11 days become something he was having trouble thinking of as purely that. "I'll handle it," he said. "Tonight," Gerard said. "The conversation should happen tonight, or first thing tomorrow at the latest, before the situation gets further along and the separation becomes harder." Lucien said nothing. He was looking at the door again. "I know," Gerard said quietly. And he went back into the study and closed the door behind him with the careful click of a man who understood that some things needed to be done in the specific privacy of an empty corridor. Lucien stood in the hall for a long time. The house had gone quiet around him. The staff rotation had changed at 11, the night shift settling into the particular hush of a large property after midnight, and the rain had finally stopped, and the silence was complete and heavy and required nothing from him. He thought about what Gerard had said. He thought about the gala, 4 days away, and the guest list, and the document handoff, and the 400 people who would be in this building Saturday evening, including at least one person whose presence he'd vetted and invited, and whose actual purpose he didn't know yet. He thought about Price and the incremental document releases, and what Price still had and hadn't moved yet. He thought about the AG timeline, which was now shorter than he'd been operating on 24 hours ago, and which had a specific terminal point that Saturday represented. And then he did the thing he rarely allowed himself to do, which was to think about what he actually wanted rather than what was operationally necessary. He did it in the specific way that the corridor's emptiness permitted, briefly, without permission, without the controlled management he applied to everything else. He wanted her to stay. The simplicity of this was almost offensive given the complexity of everything surrounding it. He wanted her to stay, not in the operational sense of useful atmospheric normalcy, not in the strategic sense of maintaining appearance through the gala. He wanted her to stay because the house was different with her in it, and he was different in ways he could feel but hadn't examined yet. And Titan, his dog, the last tangible thing from the person who'd understood him best, had chosen her with the straightforward certainty of a creature unburdened by the particular human talent for complicating simple truths. He stood with this for 30 more seconds. Then he walked down the corridor to his study, opened his laptop, and pulled up the gala guest list. 400 names. One of them with a second identity he hadn't found yet. He had 4 days. He set the other thing aside, the corridor thought, the 30 seconds of uncalibrated wanting, and put it in the specific internal location where he kept things that were true and unusable, and would have to wait. He started with the names. At 2:17 in the morning, he found the discrepancy. A guest whose organizational affiliation had been verified through a referral contact. A contact who, when he ran the chain backward, connected to a name that connected to a number that connected to the AG unit. The name on the gala list was a man called Theodore Harlan, listed as a philanthropic advisor to a coastal development trust. Theodore Harlan had attended 3 Vescari Foundation events in the past 4 years. He'd shaken Lucien's hand. He'd eaten the catered dinner. He'd applauded during the speeches. Lucien sat back in his chair and looked at the name on the screen and understood that the event he'd been planning for 6 months, the event that was supposed to demonstrate stability and legitimacy and the Vescari Foundation's genuine ongoing commitment to its stated causes, had been, for at least 4 years, a location under observation by people who had been patient enough to become familiar before they moved. Gerard had said, find out which one. He'd found which one. And the finding had opened a larger question, not just what Harlan was positioned to receive from Price on Saturday, but what Harlan had been observing and documenting across 4 years of handshakes and catered dinners, and what shape the thing he'd been building actually was. He picked up his phone and called Marcus. "Get Gerard," he said. "Get Dino, study, 30 minutes. He ended the call and looked at the laptop screen. Then he looked at the credenza. The music box sat in the yellow desk lamp light, rosewood and brass, small and fixed and permanent. Somewhere above him, on the 3rd floor of the east wing, a door opened and closed quietly. The sound of someone who couldn't sleep either, moving in the dark, the soft sound of feet on heated tile. He looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then he looked back at the screen and at Theodore Harlan's name. and understood with the complete and irreversible clarity of a man who has finally seen the full shape of the trap he is standing inside that this Saturday was not going to be an event he could manage by finding the right lever to pull. Because the lever he would have reached for, the person who could walk through 400 people and make it feel safe, who could stand at the center of an impossible evening and make everyone in it feel like the room was all right, was the same person that Gerard had told him needed to be off this property before Saturday arrived. He could not protect her by keeping her here. He could not do what needed to be done Saturday with her gone. There was no version of the next 4 days in which he did not ask something of her that he had no right to ask. He sat with this until Gerard knocked on the study door at 2:51, and then he stood up and straightened his jacket and went to answer it, carrying the unsolvable thing with him the way he carried everything, silently, upright, without letting it change his step. He told her at 6 in the morning, not because 6 in the morning was the right time for it, but because he'd been awake all night and she'd been awake most of it, and the house in the pre-dawn hour had the particular quality of a place that was holding its breath. And he'd decided that waiting until a more reasonable hour would mean he'd constructed more reasons not to say it clearly. He knocked. She answered immediately, still dressed, hair tied back, the look of someone who'd been sitting in the chair by the window rather than lying down. She looked at his face and stepped back from the door to let him in without asking. He told her about Harlan. He told her about the document handoff. He told her about what Gerard had said, the peripheral documentation, the association standard, what her presence in this house could look like in a case file that didn't care about accurate context. He told her all of it, standing near the door, not sitting, because sitting would have suggested this was a conversation with more give in it than it had. She listened with her arms crossed, and her weight shifted slightly back, the posture of someone taking a blow and distributing it through their whole body so no single point had to absorb all of it. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Titan, on the floor near the bed, watched them both. "You're telling me to leave," she said. "I'm telling you what Gerard said," he said. "What he's right about, technically." "Technically." She looked at him. "What are you telling me?" He held her gaze. "I'm telling you that the gala is Saturday, and that the person I need in that room is someone those 400 people will respond to the way they've responded to you in this house for 2 weeks. Someone who can stand in the middle of it and make it feel like there's nothing wrong." He paused. "And that asking you to do that is something I have no right to ask." She uncrossed her arms. "But you're asking." "I'm explaining the situation," he said. "The decision is yours." She turned and looked at the window. The sky outside was doing the thing it did just before dawn. Not light yet, but the specific pre-light quality that was different from dark. The blue-gray of something about to change. She looked at it for a while. "If I stay through Saturday," she said, "and the handoff happens anyway, and the AG unit moves, then I have legal problems," he said. "And so, peripherally, might you." "How peripherally?" "Witness list, document request, questions you'd have to answer." He said it without insulation. "You haven't done anything, but answering questions about things you haven't done is still a process that takes time and money and stress." She turned back to him. "And if it works, if Saturday resolves the way you need it to, then I've handled the immediate problem. The price situation has a separate track. Gerard is working it, but the gala is the pressure point." She looked at him for a long moment. He looked back. He wasn't going to pitch it. He wasn't going to add anything else. She was a person who made decisions with clear information, and he'd given her clear information, and the rest was hers. "I need to know one thing," she said. "Ask. After Saturday, whatever happens, after Saturday, am I a liability? To you, to this? Does my knowing what I know put me in a position where someone in your world decides I'm a problem?" The question was direct, and it deserved a direct answer, and he gave it one. "No," he said. "You're not a liability. You're not a threat. Anyone who decided you were a problem would be answering to me for the decision, and they know what that means." She held his gaze for another moment, assessing. He let her assess. "Okay," she said. "I'll stay through Saturday." He nodded. He started to turn toward the door. "Lucienne?" He stopped. "After Saturday," she said, You and I are going to have a different conversation than any we've had so far. He looked back at her. I know, he said. He left her at the window with the pre-dawn light coming in behind her and went back downstairs to the study where Gerard and Dino and Marcus were waiting. And when he came through the door, they all looked at his face and read the answer without him saying it. And Gerard picked up his pen and went back to the papers in front of him, and the work of the next 4 days began. Thursday moved like a fist closing. Lucien ran the household on 2 parallel tracks simultaneously. The visible track, which was the gala preparation proceeding normally, catering logistics and floor plan reviews and security sweep scheduling, and the 100 operational details of moving 400 people through a formal event, and the invisible track underneath it, which was 4 days of the most precise information management he'd run since inheriting the family. Harlan had to believe the event was proceeding without deviation. Any change in pattern, any cancellation, any adjustment to the guest list, any visible increase in security density, and he'd abort the handoff and the opportunity would disappear into a different shape that would be harder to address. So the gala proceeded with total surface normality, which required Lucien to have 2 simultaneous conversations in every meeting, the one happening out loud and the one happening underneath it. Dino handled the security reconfiguration, pulling additional personnel undercover identities that fit the event's existing vendor profiles, distributing them through catering, facilities, and the event photography team with the quiet precision of a man who had done exactly this kind of thing before and did it without needing to be told twice. Raph ran the communications intercept on the property's perimeter, monitoring for any outbound contact from Harlan to the AG unit. Gerard worked the price angle through legal channels that moved faster when properly motivated, and had, by Thursday evening, located and frozen 3 of the 4 document packages Price had staged for transmission. The 4th package was the problem. The 4th package was the one that mattered most. The upstream source documentation that Celeste had provided, whatever it actually contained, which Price had apparently not staged through the usual channels because he knew those channels were theoretically monitorable. He'd moved it physically. Hard copy. And Gerard's source inside Price's operation said it was going to Harlan on Saturday, in person, at the gala, which was why the gala was the pressure point rather than one event among several. Price was going to be in the room. This was new information. This arrived Thursday at 3 in the afternoon, delivered by Gerard in the study doorway with the careful neutrality of a man who understood that some pieces of information changed the operational landscape significantly and needed to be given without editorial. Lucien absorbed it. He's on the list. Added 3 weeks ago, Gerard said, under a donor tier that processes through the Foundation's online portal, vetted automatically. The name passed the standard check because, he paused, because he's been legitimate, on paper, for a long time. And Harlan, table 12, east side, near the secondary exit. Lucien looked at the floor plan on the desk. Table 12 was visible from the main podium, but not from the primary security station. It was adjacent to the corridor that led to the catering staging area, which had a service exit to the east garden. If someone wanted a location in that room that allowed for a brief, low-visibility exchange and a fast departure, Table 12 was a reasonable choice. Put 2 of Dino's people in catering staging, he said. I want the service corridor visible from both directions. Done. And Price stays in the room until I decide when he leaves. Gerard nodded and went away. Lucien stood at the desk with the floor plan and the seating chart and the specific problem of 400 people moving through a space where 2 of them had a purpose that would end in catastrophe if it concluded. He was aware, looking at the floor plan, that the main podium was where the principal address would be delivered. He was the principal. The address was 12 minutes, prepared 3 months ago for a foundation event about rescue animal rehabilitation programs and coastal conservation initiatives, and the kind of civic engagement that made the Viscari name mean something on paper that balanced out what it meant in other rooms. Rescue animal rehabilitation. He looked at that line in his notes and felt something that was almost a kind of dark irony, and then felt something underneath the irony that was more straightforward and harder to name. He picked up his phone and called Marlowe. The gala presentation, he said when she answered. There's a component about the Foundation's animal welfare programming. I'd like you to speak. A pause on the line. Speak. 3 minutes. What you do, what it's done for the animals you've worked with, what it could do with proper sustained funding. He paused. It's genuine. The foundation has been looking at a sanctuary program for 2 years. It hasn't gone anywhere because... He stopped. It's been a low priority. 3 minutes in front of 400 people, she said. Yes. I talk to dogs for a living. I know. You're the best communicator I've seen in this house in 11 years. He said it flat, factual. 3 minutes. You won't need to think about the room. Just say what's true. Another pause. He could hear her breathing on the line, the particular quality of someone making a fast decision and running the edges of it. Okay, she said. Thank you, he said, and meant it in a way that the 2 words weren't equipped to carry. Friday arrived with cold, clean weather, the storm finally gone, the sky a hard, bright blue that made the property look like a painting of itself. The gala setup crew arrived at 9, legitimate, vetted, the same company the foundation had used for 3 years, and by noon the main hall of the estate's event wing was filling with round tables and white linens and the particular infrastructure of a formal evening. Marlowe worked Titan in the east yard during the setup, keeping his routine intact. The dog was attentive but calm, processing the increased activity on the property with the equanimity of an animal whose internal state had fundamentally reorganized over the past 2 weeks. He stayed close to her without crowding, moving when she moved, settling when she settled, watching the new faces with the working intensity of a dog who'd learned to distinguish between things that required response and things that only required observation. Dino came out at 1 in the afternoon, stood at the fence watching them for a minute. She prepped for tomorrow? He asked, not looking at Lucien, who'd come out of the main building at approximately the same moment from approximately the same impulse. Yes, Lucien said. Good. Dino was quiet for a moment. She's going to be the only person in that room who doesn't know what they're actually watching. That's why she'll work, Lucien said. Dino looked at him sideways. That's not the only reason you want her there. Lucien said nothing. I'm just saying, Dino said, with the diplomatic bluntness of a man who'd known Lucien for 12 years and had made peace with the professional consequences of occasional honesty. She's good for this place. Harlan and Price are a problem to solve. She's a different kind of thing. He walked back inside. Lucien stayed at the fence. In the yard, Marlowe was running Titan through the new targeting exercise, the hand signal, the soft whistle, the dog crossing 20 feet of open ground and folding into the settle with an ease that had been impossible 3 weeks ago. She said something to him afterward, private, the kind of running commentary that she kept up with working animals as a matter of professional habit, but that in this dog's case had moved past professional habit into something that was simply the way she talked to him because he understood the emotional register even when he couldn't parse the words. Titan looked up at her. His tail moved twice, slow and certain. Lucien turned and went back inside before he could continue standing there, because standing there was not currently useful, and he had a floor plan that needed the table positioning reviewed, and a 12-minute speech that he'd written 3 months ago and needed to look at again. Now that the event meant something different than it had when he'd written it. Saturday came in cold and clear and arrived faster than 4 days had any right to move. By 7 in the evening, the main hall was full of people in formal wear and the specific kind of cultivated ease that money produced in social settings, the kind that looked relaxed and was in fact extremely controlled. Lucien moved through it the way he always moved through these events, present at every introduction, attentive in every conversation, the public face of a man whose organization had complex interests and a significant philanthropic infrastructure, and who had maintained both with consistent elegance for 11 years. He spotted Harlan at 8:14, at table 12, exactly where the seating chart placed him, nursing a glass of wine and carrying on what appeared to be a genial conversation with the woman to his left. He was 52, silver-haired, the kind of face that read as trustworthy because it had been engineered over decades to read exactly that way. He'd shaken Lucien's hand at 7:45 in the reception line with the practiced warmth of a man who attended a lot of these events, which he did, some of them for their stated purpose, and at least 4 of them for purposes that would end careers if they became public. He didn't look nervous. That was professional discipline. Lucien cataloged it. He spotted Price at 8:27, standing near the bar on the east wall with a drink he wasn't drinking, positioned in a line of sight to table 12 that was casually maintained. They hadn't spoken. They wouldn't, overtly. Whatever the exchange was, it would happen in a corridor or a transition or the brief geography between 2 points where a folded document could move from one pocket to another in the space of a handshake. Dino's people were in position. Raph had the secondary corridor. Marcus was on the room perimeter. The floor plan in Lucian's head was live and current. He found Marlowe at 8:30 near the foundation display panels on the north wall, standing with a glass of water she was holding, mostly for something to do with her hands, wearing the dark green dress that Pia had produced from somewhere on Thursday, with the brisk certainty of a woman who understood that some situations required intervention on multiple fronts. She looked like herself in it, which was the best thing a dress could do for a person. Not transformed, just more fully visible. She looked at him when he came over. Her face did the private thing. "There are a lot of people," she said. 412. "You know the exact number." "I know everything about this room," he said. "That's my job tonight." She looked around the hall. Her gaze moved with the particular quality of attention she brought to spaces. Not performance, actual reading, the same quality she used in kennels and training yards. "The man near the bar," she said quietly. "He's watching the room, but he's positioned on an angle. He's not looking at the room. He's looking at one specific table." Lucian looked at her. "Third from the left," she said. "East side." "Table 12, he said. "The man there with the silver hair has checked his jacket pocket 4 times since I've been standing here," she said. "People who are comfortable don't check their pockets. People who are carrying something they're worried about do." He looked at her for a moment. "You've been doing this for 8 minutes." "I watch how things move," she said. "Animals, people, rooms, it's the same skill set." She looked at him. "What's going to happen tonight?" "A man is going to try to pass documents to another man," he said. "And it's not going to work. Because of you. Because of what I've arranged." She looked at the room again. "What do you need me to do?" "In 40 minutes, you're going to speak for 3 minutes about animal behavioral rehabilitation and what sustained funding could accomplish," he said. "You're going to be exactly yourself, and then you're going to come back and stand next to me and stay there." She looked at him. "Stay next to you." "Yes." She read something in that. He could see her reading it. "Okay," she said. He moved off into the room and she stayed at the display panels, and the evening moved forward with the specific momentum of a thing that has been set in motion and cannot now be redirected, only met. At 8:51, Price moved. He set his untouched drink on a passing server's tray and oriented himself toward the east corridor with the casual drift of a man looking for the restroom. The move was smooth, unhurried, designed to read as entirely purposeless. If you weren't watching the geometry of the room, it was invisible. Lucien had been watching the geometry of the room since 7:30. He touched his earpiece once. Marcus acknowledged. Dino's voice came back from the secondary corridor. "Staging." Price turned into the east corridor at 8:53. At table 12, Harlan set his wine glass down and began the preliminary motion of standing. The weight shift, the napkin replacement, the chair push. All of it at the pace of a man with no particular urgency, just the natural table departure of a gala guest stepping away for a moment. He stood at 8:54, and at 8:54 and approximately 15 seconds, the lights in the main hall shifted as the event coordinator's team prepared the program presentation, and the podium illuminated, and the Foundation's director of programming stepped to the microphone to begin the introduction sequence that would culminate in Lucien's address. Harlan was 4 steps from his table and had not yet reached the corridor. In the new focused light of the podium setup, in the shift of ambient attention that 400 people produced when the formal program began and the room collectively turned toward the front, Harlan paused. He looked toward the podium. He looked toward the corridor. He recalculated. He sat back down. Lucien, watching from the room's north edge, let out a breath that didn't show anywhere on his face. The timing was intentional. The program's start time had been moved 11 minutes earlier than the printed schedule, changed that afternoon, communicated to the event team as a minor logistical adjustment. 11 minutes was enough. It put the program start inside the window Harlan had planned to use for the corridor exchange. It meant Harlan would have to wait. Waiting was the problem. Waiting meant exposure. Waiting meant Price standing in a service corridor where Dino's people were positioned, waiting for a contact who wasn't coming, for a period long enough that the situation could be read clearly by the people in the right positions to read it. Lucien walked to the podium. The program went through its components: foundation metrics, conservation update, the board recognition segment, and then the director introduced the evening's featured speaker for the animal welfare component. And Marlowe walked to the microphone with her glass of water still in her hand and the particular quality of someone who had decided to be exactly themselves and had no backup plan if that didn't work. She set the water glass on the podium edge. She looked at the room. The room looked back. "I'm a dog trainer," she said. "Technically, I'm a certified animal behaviorist, but that's a lot of syllables for what I actually do, which is sit on the ground with frightened animals and wait until they decide I'm not going to hurt them." She paused. "It takes longer than you'd think, and it works better than you'd think." The room was listening, not the polite programmatic listening of a gala audience waiting for the next segment, actual listening. "The dogs I work with most are the ones who've been through something. Working dogs who've been retired without transition support. Animals from disrupted environments who've developed what looks like aggression, but is actually just fear. Animals that everyone's given up on because the fear got too loud, and the behavior got too big, and the professional consensus became that some dogs aren't recoverable." She looked at the room with the quiet directness of someone who didn't need the room's validation to say what was true. The consensus is wrong, almost every time. The dog isn't broken. The dog is waiting for someone to sit down. She talked for 3 minutes and 14 seconds. When she stopped, the applause was not polite. It was the real kind. Startled out of 400 people by a woman with a glass of water and 14 days of experience standing in this particular world, saying something that landed because it was simply and completely true. She walked back from the podium toward the north wall. Lucien was at the microphone before the applause finished, and the transition gave him 30 seconds to absorb what he'd just watched: the room's response, the quality of it, the specific thing she'd done without knowing she was doing it, and to carry it with him to the 12-minute address that he'd written for a different version of this evening. He spoke for 14 minutes. He departed from the prepared text in 3 places, and none of the departures were planned, and 2 of them were about what sustained support for the kind of work Marlowe had described could look like if the foundation committed to it as a primary initiative rather than a peripheral line item. He said these things in front of 400 people and meant them with a completeness that surprised him slightly and would sort itself out later. He was at the 12-minute mark, approaching the prepared close, when his earpiece registered Dino's voice, flat and direct. "Price is moving." He kept his cadence. He did not look toward the east side of the room. He finished the sentence he was on, moved into the transition to the close, and said to Marcus, sub-audible, behind the microphone, "Hold him in the corridor." "He's got the package," Dino said. "Physical, inside jacket." Lucien reached the close. He delivered it. The room applauded. He stepped from the podium with the controlled ease of a man completing a routine event and turned toward the east corridor, and the expression on his face was not the expression of a man completing a routine event. The corridor was lit by the secondary lighting rig, lower than the main hall, utilitarian, the bare working light of a space not meant to be seen by guests. Price was standing between 2 of Dino's people, neither of whom had their hands on him, because that was not how this was done. He was standing between them the way a man stood between 2 walls that had appeared where there used to be open space. He was 57, heavier than he'd been when Lucien had first retained him, with the gray pallor of a man who'd been running a stress load for 6 weeks that he hadn't been built to carry. He looked at Lucien when Lucien came around the corner, and the expression on his face was the specific expression of a man who'd had a plan that had seemed, in the planning, like it would look different in the execution. "Dorian," Lucien said. Price opened his mouth. "Don't explain it," Lucien said. "Just give me the package." Price's hand went to his jacket and stopped. His jaw worked once. "You can't—" "Dorian." Lucien's voice was quiet, completely quiet. The quietness of something that had decided not to become anything louder because louder would have been easier and ease wasn't the point. "Give me the package. Tonight. Like this. or I make a call that takes 3 minutes, and Monday is a very different morning for everyone in this building whose last name isn't Viscari. The corridor held the silence for a beat that lasted longer than beats should. Price's hand moved into his jacket and came out with an envelope. Thick, sealed, standard letter size. The extraordinary inside the completely ordinary, which was how these things always moved. He held it out. Lucien took it. He didn't look at it. He handed it to Gerard, who had appeared at the corridor's other end with the quiet inevitability of a man who'd been positioned there for 2 hours. "Marcus is going to take you to your car," Lucien said to Price. "Your retainer with this organization is terminated as of tonight. Gerard will be in touch Monday about the terms of separation." He looked at him. "Go home." Price went. Marcus fell in beside him without touching him, because that was not how this was done. Lucien stood in the corridor with the secondary lighting and the hum of 400 people audible through the wall, and the specific quality of a thing that has just closed that was not the same as relief. He was back in the main hall in 4 minutes. At table 12, Harlan sat with his wine glass at an event that had gone 45 minutes past the window he'd planned for and showed no signs of producing the contact he'd come for. He looked like a man at a gala, which he was, except that the thing he'd come to the gala for was not going to arrive. And the man who knew that was now walking across the room toward the north wall, where a woman in a dark green dress was standing and watching the door through which he came with an expression she wasn't managing. He reached her. She looked at his face and looked at his hands and read the night in both of them. "It's done," he said. Her exhale was small and controlled. "Harlan?" "He'll leave in his own time," Lucien said. "He came to receive something. He didn't receive it. There's nothing actionable in his presence here, and he knows that." He paused. "He'll be back at some point in a different form. That's a problem for a different day." She nodded. She was looking at the room with the post-adrenaline quality of someone coming down from a sustained readiness, the particular decompression of a body that had been held at attention and is now receiving the signal to stand down. Titan would have felt it on her, Lucien thought. The dog would have felt it and moved closer. He moved slightly closer. She looked at him. "There's something else," he said. He said it carefully, because the thing he was about to say had been in the internal location he kept for true and unusable things since Thursday morning, and was now in the corridor aftermath of a night that had gone the way it needed to go and cost what it needed to cost, the only thing left to say. "The Sanctuary Program," he said. "The Foundation Initiative. I meant what I said up there." She looked at him. "I know you did." "I want to fund it," he said. "Properly. Not as a line item, as a primary program. I want it on this property. I want you to run it." He paused. "I want you to stay." The room was loud around them with the resumed social current of 400 people who had just watched a program and were now returning to the ordinary business of a formal evening. The noise was generous cover for the particular quality of the silence that was happening between them. She looked at him for a long moment. He held the look the way he held most things, without flinching from it, without managing it into something easier. "That's a big ask," she said. "I know. You own an organization that does things I'm not going to pretend I'm comfortable with," she said. "That's not going to change." "No," he said. "Parts of it will. Some of it is already changing, but not all of it, and I won't tell you it will." She looked at him with the flat directness of a woman who had come onto this property by accident and had stayed through increasingly complex reasons and was now standing in the middle of a formal gala, having the most honest conversation she'd had in 2 weeks, possibly longer. "You said you don't lose things you've decided to keep." "Yes." "Is that what this is?" she said. "Or is it something else?" He looked at her, directly, without the controlled vocabulary his face usually operated in, without the professional insulation of 20 years of exactly this kind of room. "Something else," he said. Across the hall, at table 12, Theodore Harlan set down his empty wine glass with the contained precision of a man absorbing a disappointment and began the process of composing an exit. His contact had not come. The package had not moved. The evening was closing around him with the ordinary momentum of a social event reaching its natural conclusion. He stood. He straightened his jacket, He looked once across the room with the professional thoroughness of a man doing a final assessment, and his gaze passed over the north wall, over a woman in a dark green dress, and the man standing close enough to her that the distance was no longer professional, and Harlan catalogued what he saw without expression and turned toward the main exit. He walked out of the room. At the north wall, Marlowe looked at Lucien. For another long moment, something was moving through her expression that was complicated and honest and moving towards something simple. "I have a dog to see in the morning," she said. "He'll be in the kennel," Lucien said. "Same as every morning." "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. She looked at the room, at the formal evening concluding around them, at the foundation banners and the white linen tables, and the 400 people who had no idea what the night had actually cost and what it had actually produced. "Lucienne," she said. He looked at her. "Ask me again," she said. "Tomorrow, not tonight." She held his gaze. "Ask me when it's just us and the dog and the morning, and ask me like you mean it." He held her gaze for a moment. "Tomorrow," he said. She nodded once and looked out at the room, and he stood beside her while the gala wound toward its end. The most dangerous night his organization had navigated in 3 years, concluding in the particular quiet of a formal room, doing what formal rooms did, around 2 people standing close enough together that Titan, in the kennel across the dark yard, lifted his broad head from his paws and listened, with the specific attentiveness of an animal that could feel something shifting even through stone walls, toward the sound of something that was finally. The morning after this gala arrived the way mornings arrived after nights, that had taken something from you, quietly, without apology. The light coming in through the east windows, the same pale gold it always was, indifferent to what the preceding hours had cost. Lucien was in the study at 5:40 when Gerard called. He answered on the second ring. "Price made contact with the AG unit last night," Gerard said, after Marcus dropped him at his car. Lucien closed his eyes for 2 seconds. What did he give them? He told them the handoff failed, that the documents didn't transfer. Gerard paused. And then he told them he wanted to renegotiate the immunity arrangement. He's claiming the original terms were insufficient given the risk level. He's bluffing, Lucien said. He's bluffing with real cards, Gerard said. He still has the Celeste documentation. Whatever she gave him, we have the envelope from last night, but that was the Harwick structural material. The upstream source document is something she gave him separately earlier. We don't have it. Lucien sat with this for a moment. The study was quiet. The music box sat on the credenza, wound, silent. "Where's Celeste?" he said. "Ashcroft House," Gerard said. "She's been there since Saturday morning per your instruction." "Call her," he said. "Not Marcus. You. Tell her I need to speak with her this morning. Tell her it's not a confrontation." He paused. "Tell her it's a conversation between 2 people who both made mistakes and need to settle what they cost." "She'll come?" "She'll come," he said. "She's been waiting for me to call since Saturday. That's the kind of person she is. It doesn't make what she did better. It just makes it comprehensible." He ended the call and sat at the desk in the early morning quiet and thought about comprehensibility, about the specific work of understanding why people did the things they did without using understanding as a reason to excuse the damage. These were different operations. He'd spent his whole adult life in an industry that required him to hold both simultaneously, to understand the logic of a betrayal completely and still address it fully, and the skill had always felt like a cold one, a professional instrument. It felt different now, for reasons he wasn't going to examine before coffee. He went to the kitchen and made coffee, and then, because the kennel block was visible from the kitchen window and the light was on in it already, he poured a second cup and went outside. She was sitting cross-legged on the kennel floor when he came in, back against the wall, Titan's head in her lap, both of them apparently in the middle of the kind of early morning quiet that required nothing from either of them. She looked up when he came through the door. He held out the coffee. She took it without comment. He sat down on the floor beside her, not something he'd done in approximately 30 years, sitting on a concrete floor, and leaned back against the same wall, and Titan opened one eye to assess the new arrangement, determined it was acceptable, and closed it again. They sat like that for a while. The coffee was warm. The kennel had the particular smell of clean animal and cedar shavings and the homemade biscuits she kept in a tin on the supply shelf, and it was not a smell that had anything to do with the world he'd been managing since midnight, and the contrast was something his body registered before his mind caught up with it, a slow loosening in his shoulders that he hadn't authorized. Price didn't fully stand down, he said. She looked at the middle distance, at the kennel wall, at nothing specific. How bad? Manageable, he said, but it requires one more conversation I didn't want to have. Celeste. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. Titan's breathing was slow and even under her hand. What does she actually have? The document she gave Price. He looked at the ceiling. The kennel ceiling was corrugated metal, and in the morning light, it was the color of old pewter. Financial records from a period 4 years ago when the organization's structure was less clean than it is now. Things I'd already moved away from, already restructured, but on paper, in that period, they look like what they are. He paused. Which is worse than they currently are. Will it end you? She said. He looked at her. The directness of the question, no performance around it, no softening, landed the way her directness always landed, which was clean. It could create significant legal exposure, he said. For me personally, and for several people around me, the exposure is real. Managing it requires Celeste to remove what she gave Price from play. Why would she do that? Because I'm going to ask her honestly, he said, and because what she actually wanted from me, what she's always wanted, wasn't power or position. She wanted to matter to me genuinely, and I'm going to tell her the truth, which is that she does matter to me, that what happened between us was real on my end too, that I handled it badly for a long time and that was my failure. He turned the coffee cup in his hands. And then I'm going to ask her to stop. Marlowe looked at him. You think that'll work? I think she's a person who did a destructive thing because she was in pain, he said. And I think people in pain, when the person who caused the pain actually acknowledges it, sometimes choose differently than they would otherwise. He paused. I'm not certain, but it's the right thing to try first. She looked at him for another moment, with the expression she used when she was assessing something, the focused, unperformed look that she used the same way with people as with animals, the same quality of actual attention. You're different than I thought you were going to be, she said. What did you think I was going to be? Harder, she said, all the way through, the kind of hard that doesn't have anything underneath it. He thought about his father's handwriting on the back of the photograph in this study, the date from 19 years ago. The specific lesson the date represented, which he'd spent 19 years applying, which had made him effective and had also made him, in the way that any single tool overused makes its user, limited in specific directions. There's something underneath it, he said. I know, she said. I could tell from the way you were with him. She put her hand on Titan's broad head. You loved him, Renato. Whoever he was to you, the dog knew. He said nothing. He looked at Titan, who was still asleep or performing sleep with the convincing commitment that large dogs brought to rest. The dog's flank rose and fell. The weight of him was settled and absolute. He was the person in my family who didn't require me to be anything other than what I was, Lucien said. It came out more simply than he'd intended. He didn't walk it back. Marlowe nodded once, slowly, the nod of someone receiving a true thing and not making more of it than it needed to be. They finished their coffee in the kennel with the Sunday morning light coming through the east-facing window slat in one long yellow line across the concrete floor, and neither of them said anything else, and neither of them needed to. Celeste arrived at 10. She came alone, which he hadn't expected. No assistant, no car service, just her own car pulling up the main drive, which meant she'd driven herself, which meant she'd spent the night thinking about this morning in a way that was private enough that she hadn't wanted anyone present for the mental state it required. He met her at the door. Not Marcus, not Gerard. Him. She looked not diminished, because Celeste Ashcroft was not a person who diminished easily. It was one of the things about her that was genuinely admirable, but altered. The specific alteration of a person who had gone through a night that reconfigured them slightly, who was standing in the rearranged version of themselves and hadn't fully cataloged what had moved. He brought her to the sitting room. The good one, not the study. A room without his desk between them, without the operational weight of his primary working space. He'd asked the staff to leave coffee and had sent them away, and the room was quiet and properly lit and had nothing in it that needed to perform anything. She sat. He sat across from her. He put his coffee down. I handled you badly for 3 years, he said. I want to say that first. Not as context for anything else, just because it's true, and I owe you the direct version of it. She looked at him. Her hands were in her lap, controlled, and her face was doing the thing it did when it was being controlled too, and underneath the control was something that was tired and raw and older than most of the expressions he'd seen on it. You let me wait, she said. You never said yes, and you never said no, and you let me build something in that space, and then you let someone else walk in and fill a room you'd been keeping empty. Her voice was even. That's what you did. Yes, he said. And you knew, she said. You knew I was building in that space. You saw it. Yes, he said. I saw it, and I didn't address it because addressing it would have required closing a door I hadn't decided to close. That was a failure of honesty. It cost you, and it cost you something real, and I'm not going to explain it as strategy or circumstance. It was a failure. He looked at her directly. I'm sorry for the specific thing I did. Not as an opener for a negotiation, just, I'm sorry. The room held that for a moment. Celeste looked at her hands. She looked at the window. She looked back at him with the expression of a woman who had prepared for a version of this conversation that involved more combat and had not fully prepared for the version where the person on the other side simply told the truth, without armor. I gave Price documents that could hurt people who had nothing to do with what I was angry about, she said. I know that. I knew it when I did it. She paused. I told myself I wasn't going to use them unless I needed to, that having them was just security. And then the music box. She stopped. That was different. That was, I wanted to see what you'd do, if you'd choose her over the evidence. Her voice thinned slightly. You didn't choose. You held both. You looked for the truth. Yes, he said. She's good, Celeste said. Not bitter, exhausted. She's genuinely good, not performed good. I've watched performed good my entire life, and I know the difference. She looked at him. You know that's what I was doing, performing it. For you, for your world, performing the version of myself that fit. I know, he said. She doesn't perform it, she said. She just, is it? That's the thing that's hardest to be angry at. He said nothing. He let her have the space the sentence needed. I'll contact Price, she said. I'll tell him I'm removing the documentation from any arrangement. What I gave him, I have the original. What he has is a copy. I can make the copy inadmissible by demonstrating it was provided under a false representation of consent. She paused. Gerard will know the mechanism. He can walk me through the process. Celeste, don't thank me, she said. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it because what I used those documents for was wrong, and I don't want to be the person who did that. I want to be... She stopped. Something moved through her face that was private and that he chose not to look at too directly. I want to be the kind of person who fixes what she breaks, even when it's hard. He looked at her for a moment. You are that person, he said. You've always had that in you. I should have seen it more clearly. She nodded once. She stood, smoothed her jacket with the precise habitual gesture of a woman who had been trained to compose herself physically as a form of self-management. She held out her hand. He stood and shook it, held it for a moment. Not romantically, just the grip of two people who had been through something together and were choosing to end it without leaving any more damage than what was already there. She left. He heard her car on the gravel. He stood in the sitting room until the sound was gone, and then he stood there a little longer, and then he went to find Gerard. But the Price situation resolved in the way that Gerard handled things, methodically, without drama, through the specific application of legal mechanisms that moved faster when applied correctly and left the opposing party with significantly fewer options than they'd begun with. By Tuesday afternoon, the document package was legally withdrawn. The AG unit's case built around material that had been obtained through a process now challenged on multiple procedural grounds, paused. Paused was not gone. Gerard was clear about this. But paused was manageable, and manageable was what the next chapter required. Harlan resigned from 3 philanthropic boards on Wednesday, citing personal reasons. He was not arrested. He was not charged. He simply became a person who was no longer in certain rooms, which was how these things concluded when the evidence was real, but the exposure was mutual. Theodore Harlan had his own complications that his presence at the Viscari Gala had reminded the right people of, and the reminder had been quiet and had arrived through channels that Lucian neither confirmed nor denied. Price lost his legal practice. Not dramatically. No disbarment proceedings, no public action, just a sudden comprehensive departure of his client base and the particular reputation collapse that preceded formal consequences in his profession. He moved to a smaller city. He did not contact the Viscari organization again. These were not clean endings. Lucian knew that. He didn't require them to be clean. He required them to be over, and they were over. Wolf's. The conversation he'd promised Marlowe happened on Sunday evening, 4 days after the gala, when the property had returned to something approaching its normal rhythm, and the formal event infrastructure had been dismantled, and the east wing was quiet and the dog was fed. He found her at the oak tree at the east edge of the property. The old one, gnarled and enormous, that had been on the property longer than the house, and that Titan had adopted as his preferred afternoon resting location about a week into his behavioral recovery. She was sitting at the base of it with her back against the trunk and a notebook in her lap, writing something in the practiced shorthand of her session notes. Titan was lying beside her with his head on her knee, eyes closed, the weight of him pressed against her side in the particular way he settled when he'd decided the situation was exactly right. The late afternoon light came through the oak's lower branches at a low angle and lay across the grass in long strips of gold and shadow, and the temperature had dropped enough that her breath was faintly visible, and she hadn't looked up yet. He crossed the grass. She looked up. She closed the notebook. He sat down beside her, not against the tree, on the grass, facing the property and the house, and the kennel block visible over the roof. He sat the way a person sat when they weren't managing how they appeared to anyone, which was a way he didn't often sit. "You said to ask when it's just us and the dog," he said. She looked at him. "And the morning? It's evening." "Close enough," she said. He looked at the house, he looked at the kennel. He looked at the property that he'd inherited at 31 with no preparation and had run since through an unbroken sequence of difficult years that had required from him every instrument of hardness he possessed and had used them until they were the only instruments he remembered having. "I want to build the sanctuary," he said. "I've had Gerard start the foundation paperwork. We have 14 acres on the south side of the property that haven't been used since the old training facility was decommissioned 4 years ago. The infrastructure is partially there, the fencing, the outbuilding, the water access. It would need significant renovation, but the foundation can fund it." He looked at her. "I want you to run it, design it, staff it, all of it." She was looking at him with the focused quality of actual attention. "That's real," she said, "not just a way to make me stay." "Both," he said. "Both things are true simultaneously. I want the program because the work is worth doing. I want you to stay because—" He stopped. The sentence had multiple ways to finish, and he picked the most accurate one. "Because you are the first person I've been around in a long time who made me interested in what came next. Not what I had to manage, what came next." Titan's tail moved twice against the grass. She looked at the dog. She looked at the house. She looked at the evening light on the grass, and the way it was doing what light did at this hour in October, going golden and then amber, and then the particular quality that wasn't quite any color, just luminous. "I'm not going to pretend your world doesn't have parts I can't be part of," she said. "I'm not going to pretend I'm okay with things I'm not okay with. I won't do that ever. If something's wrong, I'll say so. That doesn't change just because—" She stopped, started again. "That doesn't change." "I know," he said. "I don't want it to change." She looked at him. "You run an organization that does things people get hurt by." "Yes. Some of that is going to be hard for me." "I know that too." And you're not going to tell me it's all going to resolve into something clean, she said, because that's not true. No, he said, it's not true. What's true is that I've spent 3 years moving towards something that's less corrosive internally in how the organization operates. It's incomplete. It'll be incomplete for a long time. He looked at her. What I can tell you is that the direction is real, and that you being here is part of what makes it feel worth the direction. She held his gaze for a long moment, the honest, unmanaged look that she brought to everything. Animals, rooms, people, the truth of things. The sanctuary, she said. Yes. I want to work with retired military working dogs specifically, she said. There's a gap in post-service support for that population that nobody's filling properly. The behavioral needs are specific, and the existing infrastructure doesn't address them. Tell Gerard, he said, he'll build the program around whatever you specify. I'm going to need a dedicated veterinary team, not on call, on site. Done. And I'm going to need the south side outbuilding gut renovated. The current ventilation is inadequate for a high-population canine facility. I'll get a contractor this week. She looked at him. Something was moving through her expression that was complicated on the surface and simpler underneath, the way most honest things were. You're saying yes to everything, she said. I'm saying yes to the right things, he said. She looked at the house again. Then she looked at Titan, who hadn't moved, whose breathing was deep and even, whose large dark face was settled in the complete ease of an animal that had arrived at exactly where it was supposed to be. He's going to be insufferable, she said, once he realizes he won. He already knows, Lucienne said. She looked at him. A short, involuntary laugh came out of her. The real kind, surprised. The kind that didn't ask permission. Then it settled, and what was underneath was something that was also real. Okay, she said. He looked at her. Yes, she said. I'll stay. He let out a breath that didn't quite show, and she saw it anyway because she saw things, and she didn't comment on it because she was also a person who knew the difference between a thing that needed to be spoken and a thing that had already communicated itself. Titan opened his eyes. He looked at Lucian. He looked at Marlowe. His tail moved 3 times, slow and deliberate, against the dry October grass. Then he closed his eyes again, because the matter was settled and there was no further action required from him on it, and the afternoon was warm enough at the base of the oak tree, and he was very comfortable. In the months that followed, the South Side facility went up in stages. The outbuilding renovation first, then the kennel expansion, then the training yards that Marlowe designed with the particular specificity of someone who had spent 8 years cataloging what the available infrastructure got wrong. The veterinary team was hired by February. 3 full-time staff, 2 part-time specialists in trauma-related behavioral disorders, a consulting neurologist for the complex cases that came in from the retired military working dog program that Marlowe had been right about, that nobody was adequately addressing. The first dogs arrived in March. 7 of them. 3 retired bomb detection shepherds, 2 Malinois from a discontinued protection program, 1 Labrador with severe noise sensitivity from an IED incident, 1 mixed breed that had come from a hoarding situation and had been so far down the list of rescue priority that 3 organizations had passed on him before Marlowe found him through a contact in a regional shelter network and had him transferred on a Tuesday and assessed by Wednesday and declared in her session notes as a straightforward grief case requiring time and patience and absolutely no aversion intervention. By April, he was sleeping on her office couch. The conference room on the 2nd floor of the main house still had the tin of homemade dog treats on the credenza. No one had ever acknowledged putting them there. No one removed them. New personnel learned about them the same way new personnel learned about most things in the Viscari organization. By watching, by paying attention, by understanding that certain things on this property were simply part of how things were now, and you adjusted. The unofficial rules circulated, as informal rules did, through the staff hierarchy with the particular efficiency of things that were true and therefore repeated. If Titan liked you, the boss would probably give you a fair hearing. If Marlowe had given you a biscuit, you were likely to be all right. These were not formal policies. They were simply what was true. On a Sunday in late April, Lucian found them the same way he had found them on a Sunday in October, under the oak tree on the east edge of the property, except that in April the oak had its new leaves and the grass was soft and the light was different, warmer, more open, the specific quality of spring light that had no nostalgia in it, only presence. Titan was asleep with his head in Marlowe's lap. She had her notebook and wasn't writing in it, just holding it, looking at the tree line. He came across the grass with 2 cups of coffee. He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched, which was a distance that had stopped requiring a decision several months ago and now simply was. She took the coffee. They looked at the property together. The house, the kennels, the south side facility with its new structure visible over the roofline, the various working pieces of a life that had accumulated in this particular location through a sequence of decisions that had started with a scheduling mistake and a dog that nobody else could reach. "The new shepherd," she said. "Kodiak. He did the full recall yesterday. Clean. No hesitation." "How long since he arrived?" 6 weeks. He looked at the tree line. "That's fast." "He was ready," she said. "He just needed the right environment." She paused. "That's most of them. They're not broken. They're just in the wrong conditions." He thought about this. He thought about the study and his father's photograph and the music box on the credenza that he still wound on Sundays, and the long sequence of wrong conditions that a person could inhabit before something, or someone, created the right one. "Marlowe," he said. She looked at him. He didn't say anything else. He just looked at her, without the professional vocabulary, without the controlled register of 20 years of managed expression. He looked at her the way the morning looked at the property, directly, without agenda, just present. She looked back, and what was on her face was the thing she'd always had. The unperformed quality, the actual thing, the version of a person that didn't know how to be anything other than itself. And it was directed at him with the same complete attention she brought to everything she'd decided was worth her time. Titan's tail moved once against the grass. Neither of them needed to say anything further. The afternoon moved through its remaining hours with the unhurried pace of days that have nothing left to prove. Light through leaves, coffee going cold, a very large dog breathing slowly in the kind of rest that only comes to animals who have found, after everything, the exact right place. The most feared man on the eastern seaboard sat under an oak tree on a Sunday afternoon with his shoulder against a woman who had arrived on his property 4 minutes late with homemade dog treats in a canvas bag. And he was not managing anything. He was simply there. That was, in the end, the thing that had cost the most to learn, and the thing that turned out to matter most. That the difference between a life that was endured and a life that was inhabited came down, in ways that no one who hadn't felt it could entirely explain, to whether you could find one place, 1 hour, one person, one dog sleeping in afternoon light, where the thing you were doing was simply being present in it. He'd found it. He hadn't seen it coming. That was, he had decided, the best way for the important things to arrive.